There are so many different ways to make pork and sauerkraut, but after trying a ton of different combinations of flavors, I think I have the perfect recipe, and it's super easy to do. Let me show you how. Welcome to the Salted Pepper, where we cook for real life using real food and we keep it real simple. And pork and sauerkraut is very simple, but there are a ton of different variations of it. So after trying different cuts of pork, different combinations of flavors, I really think that this one hit home and tastes amazing, and it's super easy to do. So the first thing I'm gonna start off with is a 3-pound pork butt. And so I got this at Aldi's actually, and they have them cut in half, and I like that because it just makes it really easy when you wanna make a small amount. But if you wanted to get a full boneless pork butt, you can either cut it in half and use 3 pounds, or you can make the entire thing. That's not going to be a problem. You're just going to need to adjust your timing a little bit. So this is going to pressure cook for 90 minutes. I would recommend going up to about 120, maybe even 160 minutes, okay, for let's say a 6-pound pork butt. You can also use different cuts of meat. I'm not going to take the time to go into all of that in this video, but I will talk about it in my written post on my website, thesaltedpepper.com, so you can check out this recipe, and I'll go over different cuts of pork that you can use and the timings that they will require. But I'm going to use the pork butt. When you're using a large cut of meat like this, I really recommend seasoning it the day before if time permits. If time does not permit, or you just are gonna grab it out of the refrigerator and make it for dinner that night, that's okay. Just season it up with salt and pepper and let it sit at room temperature for about 60 minutes, okay? It's gonna give the salt and the pepper time to penetrate the meat and really season it well. And it will also bring the cut of meat to room temperature, which makes it a little bit easier to sear. It sears more evenly, and also it's gonna cook a little bit faster. Now with the long pressure cooking time, it's not that critical. If you just need to season and get dinner started, that's okay too. So first, let's get started with searing off the pork butt, or pork shoulder, as they're also called. And we're gonna go to high sear saute. I'm gonna let the pot heat up for about 5 minutes, and then I'll put in a couple tablespoons of olive oil, and I will get the pork shoulder or pork butt in there to sear on all sides, and then it's dump and go. And that's what I love about this recipe. Now that the pan has heated up, I'm gonna go ahead and grab this pork and just plop it right in. And just let it sit, okay? You want it to sit for about 5 minutes or so. Meanwhile, I'm gonna clean up my cutting board, and we're gonna get the apples cored and peeled. So after about 5 minutes, flip it to the other side, and then we're gonna let it sear on that side. Meanwhile, let me get these apples cored and peeled. So I have 4, they're kind of smallish Gala apples, and it's about 1 pound. You can use any type of apple that you have or that you like. It's perfectly fine. You can even omit this. I just like that apple flavor that it adds. You are not going to have any texture left to your apples at the end because of the long pressure cook time. So if you wanted to have slices of apples, then I would put in maybe, a half of a pound, or put in a pound now for flavor, and then put in some extra at the end and just sort of simmer it until the apples become the texture that you like, okay? Now, because we are going under such a long pressure cook time, there's not any certain way that you need to prep your apples. I'm just going to cut them and get the skins off and throw them in. No matter how big or small they are, in 90 minutes, they're gonna disintegrate. And then I just throw them right on in. So do that with all of the apples, and then we'll add in the rest of the ingredients, and we will get under pressure. All right, so all of our apples are in, and now I'm gonna go ahead and deglaze the pan with about a 1/4 cup of chicken stock. You could use something else. Apple juice would be good. You could use beer if you wanted to introduce that flavor into this dish. That would be fine. And it's a very small amount because we do not need a lot to go under pressure because the meat's gonna release a lot of liquid. We've got a few other liquids. We've got the sauerkraut that's got some liquid. So you do not need any more liquid than a 1/4 cup. This already smells so good. So just try to move the pork around a little bit and scrape off any areas that look a little brown, just to avoid that water, notice. All right, next ingredient going in are 3 red onions that are thick sliced. So I slice these in about 1 inch. It really doesn't matter. They're gonna be super soft no matter how you slice them, but I like the way they looked in the dish, and that's why I'm using red onions, because I liked the color, but you don't have to. You can use any onions you like, or you can omit the onions if you don't like the onions. It's perfectly fine. All right. I am using jarred sauerkraut, but you could use bagged sauerkraut. You could even use canned sauerkraut. Really, just use your favorite sauerkraut and 48 ounces of it. Now, as you can see, this sauerkraut is on the dry side, meaning there's not a lot of liquid in there. If you have a sauerkraut that's really liquidy, you might want to drain some of the liquid off, or you're going to end up with a lot of liquid at the end. You already are going to have quite a bit of liquid at the end of this recipe. Now, this is the 6.5 quart, and we are pretty much at our max capacity for pressure cooking, okay? So you cannot really increase the ingredients in this recipe if you're gonna be using the 6.5 quart. Now you can use a little bit bigger cut of meat and just sort of nestle the ingredients around it, and that should be fine. But remember, when you're pressure cooking in the pot, you do not wanna overfill it past the max fill line with your food and liquid, because then you can run into some problems. All right, so let's get in the other ingredients, which are super easy and they just taste wonderful together. This is 1 tablespoon of malt vinegar, 2 tablespoons of Worcestershire sauce, 2 tablespoons of brown sugar, totally optional, but I like the combination of flavors. And then I have a 1/4 teaspoon of caraway seeds, which is definitely optional, and it does give a different flavor. So if you aren't sure if you're gonna like caraway, leave these out, okay? Because you don't wanna add them in and then dislike your entire dish. So leave them out unless you know you like caraway. And if you really love caraway seeds, then you can add in 1/2 teaspoon. I tested the recipe with 1/2 teaspoon, and I thought it was just a tad bit too much, so I went down to 1/4 teaspoon. Then I also have some salt and pepper here, but instead of adding that in right now, I'm gonna wait on that. So I'm gonna wait until after the pressure cook time, and then I will determine if it needs a little salt and pepper. I just have equal ratios, 1 to 1 of fine grind sea salt and pepper. Now I'm just gonna move this around a little bit just to sort of let some of that sauerkraut fall down and get into the grooves here, move some of the onions up. And that's gonna keep it way below that max fill line. All right, now we're ready to go under pressure. That looks good. So put the pressure lid on. Make sure your valve is turned to the sealed position. And you're gonna switch over to pressure cook. High is what we want, and you want to go to 90 minutes for this size pork butt. So 1 hour and 30 minutes, hit start. It's not going to take too much time to come up to pressure, maybe 5-10 minutes, because the pot's already hot and everything's boiling in there. So the steam will produce fairly quickly. You'll go under pressure. Once it's under pressure, let it go the 90 minutes, and then you're gonna do a 30-minute natural release. Now, this is one of those things that you could do a full natural release. It's not gonna hurt anything. You're not gonna overcook this dish, so don't worry about it. If you had to, go somewhere or do something and it's doing the natural release, it'll flip over to the keep warm and it will stay just fine for hours and hours. So don't worry about it. That's one of the great things about this dish is you could start it like before you go to bed and it would be ready in the morning and perfectly fine. Once the pin in the back drops, you can safely open up the lid. So we went under pressure for 90 minutes and then did a 30-minute natural release. There's very little pressure left after that. You could definitely do a full natural release, no problems there. Then lift the lid away from you so you direct the steam away from your face. Oh my gosh, this looks amazing. Wow. All right, now what I like to do is just go ahead and start bringing out the sauerkraut. But before I do that, I like to give it a little taste for salt and pepper. Now be careful here. I can see that there's still a lot of steam underneath, and you don't want to go deep down into the pot right away. So just take a little bit off the top. Let it settle a little bit more. Sometimes what can happen when you have fatty cuts of meat and you're pressure cooking them, there can be trapped steam underneath. So if you are questioning it at all, open the lid and let it cool down a little bit more before you reach right down into the pot, because you don't want to disturb those steam pockets, which can cause some bubble up, okay? So you don't want to do that. I just get a little bit of the sauerkraut from the top, give it a little taste for seasonings. Oh my gosh, that's perfect. Oh, wow. Don't even need any extra. Oh my gosh, wonderful. Then I will just start kind of lifting the sauerkraut off of the top here. Now some pork pieces are going to definitely come out with it because the pork is so tender. All right, look at this. So once I get the large pieces of pork out and onto my platter, then I go ahead and switch utensils because this takes a little bit of time. I don't like to put all of the juice from the sauerkraut and pork into my serving dish. But you can, of course, if you want it really juicy. What I like to do is save that juice and make a soup with the base. You know, like a nice cabbage soup. Oh my gosh, it's delicious. So I drain it off here. Now, some people like to add tomatoes to this. That would be perfectly fine. You could do that before you pressure cook. No problems at all. All right, there we go. So now we have our platter of pork and sauerkraut. Let me grab a plate and I'll give it a taste. Let's go ahead and get some of the sauerkraut. Oh my gosh, it looks so good. And a little bit of the pork here. Wonderful. Oops, I have 2 forks. Oh my gosh, it's so tender. That's exactly what you want. Cuts with a fork. Wow. This is absolutely perfect. I really like the 1/4 teaspoon of caraway, better than the 1/2 teaspoon. The flavors are so well balanced that malt vinegar really adds a special touch, so I encourage you to use it. Oh, this is simply amazing. Now you could serve this as a dinner, or you could serve it as a side. A lot of people will put pork and sauerkraut together as a side, and if that's the case, then just break up your pork a little bit and have it, throughout the sauerkraut. Oh, this is just so amazing. Get one of those onions. It's magnificent. It's so easy to make. Takes a little bit of time because you got the long pressure cook time, but it is absolutely worth it. If you want to know how to work the timing for different cuts of pork, definitely check out the written recipe on my website, thesaltedpepper.com. Add in tomatoes, change up the seasonings to what you like. As always, make it yours, make it delicious, and keep it real.